London, welcome to Piers is the public face and British leader of a controversial Islamist movement which glorified the Hamas attacks and chanted for Jihad on the streets of London. He's also a long-time NHS GP doctor, at least for now. Today, the NHS in London confirmed it suspended Dr. Wahid after his controversial appearance on this show and the newspaper reports about him. Referring to the doctor by his legal name, a spokesman told us this morning, "We take any issues relating to professional conduct seriously and have procedures in place to make sure that individuals are fit to work in the NHS. We can confirm that Dr. Wahid Shaida has been suspended from the NHS primary care performers list." Well, last month, Dr. Wahid, under his other name, was brave enough to appear on Uncensored. Brave? You can judge for yourself how it went. 1,200 people were massacred, weren't they?
I think 1,200 people were killed.
Were they massacred?
Yeah, they were killed.
Right, by terrorists?
They were killed by people who were resisting an occupation. And
they're terrorists.
Yeah, well, that's your view.
It is my view.
One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Have you never heard that?
Well, many people who saw that interview were shocked that someone who cast doubt on whether the October 7th attacks had even taken place, let alone not considering Hamas to be terrorists after it, and dismissing any civilian deaths as collateral in active resistance, could remain working in the National Health Service with a salary paid by the British taxpayer. But at the same time, it was reasonable to debate whether radical opinions have any real bearing on someone's ability to practice medicine. After all, people have every right to opinions that others find offensive. That is why he was invited onto the show in the first place. But Dr. Wahid is now effectively the head of a prescribed terror group, and is prescribed as terror group not just here in the UK now, but in numerous other countries too. And there is no defence for that. Hizb ut-Tahrir is a global Islamist movement which advocates for an Islamic caliphate under Sharia law. In this country, they made headlines for denouncing LGBT filth, as they put it, and calling for an end to the Western world order. It's outlawed in plenty of other countries, like Germany, Egypt, several Arab states. Last week, the British Parliament officially designated it as a terrorist organisation. That means membership or support for Hizb ut-Tahrir is now illegal, carrying a prison sentence of up to 14 years. Now, to be clear, I've not called for Dr. Wahid to be suspended, fired or cancelled, but I did question whether his views made him fit to serve patients, many of whom, by his own admission, don't even know about his double life because he uses two separate names. Now, he is the head of an officially prescribed terrorist organisation, and the whole argument becomes a lot simpler. It is frankly untenable for him to be working in the NHS, and if he wants any hope of continuing in those duties, he needs to start doing something he repeatedly failed to do on this show last time: distance himself publicly from terrorists and terrorism. Well, joining me now is the author, podcast host and comedian, Constantine. Constantine, great to see you. What do you make of this story? Quite extraordinary that for decades this guy had been operating in North London as a GP, and yet in his other vocation, he was leading the UK arm of a group that was already considered a terror group by many other countries and is now also considered that way in this country.
Right, and we should put some meat on the bones of that, because you mentioned the group is banned in Egypt, Germany and a few other countries. Actually, Piers, as you probably know, the group is banned in almost every Muslim country in the world. Indonesia, the most populous Muslim country in the world, has banned Hizb ut-Tahrir. Pakistan, Bangladesh, almost every Arab country in the Middle East has banned Hizb ut-Tahrir. So the question I think we really ought to be asking is, why did the British government allow these Islamists to operate in Britain for as long as they did? Now, coming to your point about whether he should be suspended from the NHS, as you know, I think both you and I are very wary of people being banned or censored in some way for the opinions that they express. But I think most British people would draw the line at being a member or indeed the head of a now proscribed terrorist organization. And of course, we also got to remember there is a difference between a guy stacking shelves in a supermarket and someone who is a GP, who would be seeing patients, know intimate details about them, know their ethnicity, religion, and have the power of, in some situations, life and death over people. So I think it's a very different case, and I've got absolutely no problem with terrorist sympathizers being prevented from working in the National Health Service.
Right, and to be clear about what his views were post October the 7th, he gave a talk on YouTube, and he said this.
They gave the enemy a punch on the nose, all right? And
And it's a very welcome punch on the nose.
Welcome punch on the nose, which is 1,200 people, including at least 800 innocent civilians, including many children, women, being brutally murdered, raped, in some cases beheaded. That was apparently a very welcome punch on the nose, says an NHS doctor whose salary is paid by the British taxpayer. I mean, I think for that alone, unless he renounces what he said there very clearly and firmly, there can be no way back for him.
Well, quite, and I think, you know, if he were to renounce it, I think we'd all question how legitimate and how sincere that renunciation would be, given his body of work, let's say, on this issue. I think there are some people who've been tolerated for far too long in our country, and members of Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is now thankfully prescribed, if they're not citizens of this country, I think the British people will be asking, why are they still here?
Yeah, because we had in October the same Wahid addressing a rally outside the Egyptian and Turkish embassies in London, during which he told the crowd, victory is coming, everyone has to choose a side. Another senior member, Mazir Khan, of the same now terror group, said, what is the solution to liberate people in a concentration camp called Palestine? And they chanted back, Jihad, Jihad, Jihad. We've got a clip of this.
What is the solution to liberate people in the concentration camp called Palestine?
Jihad!
What is the solution?
I mean, you know, there's been lots of debate about the pro-Palestinian marches. I'm going to come to some fascinating footage that you've done for a film about those. And, you know, many people are there legitimately marching for peace. I completely get that. But when you have people on the streets of London chanting jihad, 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 that is unacceptable.
And you will remember, Piers, that the Met Police shamefully, instead of dealing with those people under the law of this country, instead what they did is they said, well, jihad has many meanings, and essentially pretended not to understand what those people were calling for. But as you say, people have a right to protest. People should speak freely and express themselves. And by the way, I think actually, you know, you and I both take a lot of flack for so-called platforming people with the wrong opinions. I actually think this is a very good example of a situation in which allowing people to speak freely and express their horrific opinions in public is a method that allows them to express those opinions, and then for the public, frankly, to take a position on whether those people should be serving them in the public health service, should be in our country if they're not citizens of this country. And I actually think you've done a very good job, Piers, of bringing these people into the light and letting them hang themselves with their own rope.
Yeah, I mean, people said that you exposed him and you've got him suspended. No, he exposed himself by expressing very firmly his own views, which were supportive of Hamas, which is a prescribed terror group in this country. So that was in itself illegal, actually, what he was doing. And now he is the head of an organization that's just been designated as a terror group, and that is also illegal. So there's a lot of crime being committed here by this NHS doctor. Never mind anything else. I didn't expose that. He was doing it himself. I want to bring in now the columnist and commentator, Vajah Ali. Vajah, thank you very much indeed for joining me. What do you make of this story?
Thanks for having me.
This guy is an NHS doctor for many decades. I'm sure there'll be plenty of his patients who'd say he's a perfectly good doctor. What's it got to do with that he has these views? But now the UK government has prescribed the organisation that he runs in the UK as a terrorist organisation. Is his position as a doctor here untenable?
Well, listen, the show is called Uncensored, and I think all of us agree that in a free society, we should have something what we have in America, the First Amendment, freedom of worship, free speech, freedom of assembly, and unfortunately, there are elements, extremist elements within our society that we tolerate. That doesn't mean that we agree with them. That doesn't mean that we support them. That doesn't mean we endorse them. Like, I'll give you an example. Hizb ut-Tahrir has been an annoyance in my life. They're here in America. They're all around. They have these aspirational dreams of a caliphate that will never happen. And some of them have very hateful views, right? They do not like me at all. In this particular situation, though, you have to realize that several British governments have tried to commit Hizb ut-Tahrir as a terror organization. This is not the first, right? But they haven't found any actionable threats. In this particular climate, in the past 3 months, as you know, you had your former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, not really a fan of, I would say, Muslim or Muslim immigrants, who during these protests, where a bunch of these nuts, sparsely populated protests, yelled the word jihad and apparently praised Hamas, she wanted to expose them, right? She said, look into it. And then now, in the past 2 weeks, you finally have exposed them as a terror group, quote-unquote terror group, but there are zero actionable terror threats. So what happens in this situation? It reminds me, Piers, as an American, of a post-9/11 climate where you had 19 foreign Muslim hijackers who brought down the two towers, and the country lost its mind and used that as a giant net to go after a bunch of Muslims. We did a registry program. We deported 13,000 immigrants. We literally had the NYPD, Piers, in this country surveil Muslim mosques, Muslim students, Muslim grocery stores, right? Anyone who said the wrong word. People were kicked off of planes for saying Arabic words. So I'm sitting here and I'm listening to your conversation, and I think you did the right thing. These nuts who exist, right? You expose them, you marginalize them, you bring them on, and then they go into the fringes of society. In America, we have the KKK. In America, if you look at this, there's the Capitol right behind me. There are people who did a violent insurrection against the United States in that Capitol. We have elected officials in America who call those people political prisoners and martyrs. They're elected. People who incited violence against our law enforcement. So I think what I hope you're not doing, and I feel like you're doing, is this giant net, this giant hammer to crush them. I think it will not make things better in Great Britain and in Europe, and I think it will give fuel and fodder to extremists on both sides. The right-wing militant nationalists, the white nationalists who attacked the police after Home Secretary Braverman's article, you remember that? And also these fringe elements, I think it will further radicalize them. I don't think this is what you do in a free society, but that's just me speaking on your show called Uncensored.
Well, you know what? It's an uncensored show, and you raised some very interesting and valid points. Constantine, what's your reaction to what Jihad said there?
Well, my reaction is I encourage all our viewers to go and watch an interview with the UAE foreign minister given in 2017, in which he warned Western governments that their obsession with political correctness, his words, not mine, and being unwilling to deal with Islamic extremism in the way that it should be dealt with, will lead to more terrorism and more violent crime in their countries. And that interview has gone super viral on the internet precisely because of how prophetic it was. If, as I said earlier, almost every Muslim country in the world considers these people to be Islamic extremists who are to be banned, I think we should be learning from them on how to deal with these people, instead of thinking that we in our liberal society are able to integrate all these people. These people do not belong in this country, and their views do not belong in this country. And as I say, if they're not citizens of this country, they should not be here.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. When I walk around now, because there's been loads of memes about me, because of all the big interviews we've done, and it always has me dressed up as some reporter saying, do you condemn Hamas to inappropriate people all the time? And I get asked it in the street now, do you condemn Hamas? Like it's a joke. And I said, you know, I always reply to people, you know, you have to start with that question. Do you condemn what Hamas did on October the 7th? And do you accept it's a terrorist attack? Because if you can't accept that, Jihad, to me, if you can't accept that basic fact, which we saw not because people invented those monstrosities they committed, but because they openly, brazenly broadcast them to the world through their own technology, because they were proud of what they were committing. I don't think if you don't start from a position that you condemn what Hamas did, I don't really have much time for you.
Then why are you in a democracy? Why do you claim to be an enlightened government? Why are you any different from authoritarian Muslim countries that crack down on any group they don't like? There's a reason why we have the First Amendment. There's a reason why you have a freedom of assembly, of association, of a free speech. Because, like Voltaire said, I don't agree with what you said, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. That doesn't mean you like them. I'll give you an example. In the United States, we have the KKK, an actual terrorist group that committed terrorism against black and white Americans. They still exist. They have the right to assembly. They do their stupid marches like cowards. They put on their masks. I don't know if you saw that viral video. It went viral that a bunch of them wearing white masks in New York got stuck at a turnstile because they didn't know how to use the New York subway station. Just exquisite. It was like a Mel Brooks scene. But they exist. We had literally people saying the Jews will not replace us, and Donald Trump said they're very fine people. We literally have people, like I said, going against this Capitol right here, committing a violent insurrection. But for some strange reason, when the #1 domestic terror threat in America and also increasingly in Europe and the UK is white terrorists, white nationalist terrorists, white extremists, I never hear anyone say, you know what, we should ban them. We should deport them. Oh, what I instead hear is they have economic anxiety. The double standard here at play has to be exposed, right? And I want people to really think about what they're really advocating. If someone doesn't like your speech, you know what? you're not just going to be not tolerated, you're going to be deported, especially if you're a person of color. How does that make a multiracial society that is both the UK and America safer and better, especially, and I'm speaking now as an American, and you know in the UK, the rising domestic terror threat is not Islamic extremism, which, by the way, exists. It is white nationalist extremism. Not a single word about that, but I hear all these free speech advocates. All these people are all about Western civilization. All of a sudden turn to censorship and all of a sudden become authoritarian when it comes to Muslims and people of color.
Yeah, but hang on.
Why is that?
Hang on.
Piers, let me educate your guest a little bit about his own country. So
please
first of
educate
all,
me.
nobody's
Please educate
calling...
me.
I'm about to. Be quiet and I will. Now, first of all, nobody's calling for people to be deported because of their views. We have laws in this country against organizations that are prescribed as terrorists, and I have no problem with terrorists being removed from this country under the laws of this country. Secondly, Donald Trump never said that the people calling for the eradication of Jews were fine people. If you go and look at his quotes, he actually condemned them and said they should be condemned absolutely. But the people who were there protesting about the statues, they were the ones that were fine people. Now, you should educate yourself about those things. And thirdly, you should educate about the fact that, regrettably, I would quite like to have a First Amendment here in the UK. We do not have a First Amendment, and I would have a lot more sympathy with your argument if we hadn't spent the last 10 years watching people be sacked from their jobs for saying women are women and men are men.
Yeah, and I would also add that when you say that I'm not respecting free speech, Vajat, when I say I don't respect people who won't condemn Hamas,
I didn't say you.
No, but they can say it. They can say it. I just don't have to respect it. It's a bit like when I block people on Twitter.
Of course, you don't have to respect it.
No, but when I block people on X, for example, or formerly Twitter, and people say, well, you're suppressing their free speech. No, I'm not. They can still tweet what the hell they like. I just don't have to read it. I don't have to hear it. You know, that actually is what free speech is. And the First Amendment, which is one of the most powerful protectors of free speech in the world, it doesn't cover many things, from child pornography to defamation to all sorts of stuff is not protected by the First Amendment. And nobody, I don't think, who looks at this sensibly would say that a terror group that espouses not just hatred, but violent hatred and the mass killing of people, that is never protected by free speech, is it? And should it be?
It shouldn't be, but listen, this is interesting. Speaking about education, allow me to retort and educate. And I'll give you an example about the double standards, and I want you guys to really respond to this. Speaking about terrorism and violence, on the platform you mentioned, X, also known as Twitter, one of the wealthiest men, Elon Musk, has repeatedly promoted the replacement theory, an anti-Semitic conspiracy that blames Jews for trying to weaken and replace Western civilization with Muslims and immigrants and LGBTQ communities, right? That conspiracy theory has radicalized individuals to commit violence against Jews, against Muslims, against black people, against Latinos. That conspiracy has been retweeted and platformed and mainstreamed by the Republican Party, people like Elise Stefanik and Donald Trump, who, by the way, dined with Nick Fuentes, the leading white nationalist leader in America. You guys are fine with that.
I'm not fine with it.
When it comes to any other group that says something...
Who said we're fine with that?
Wait a minute. I wrote a whole...
Who said we're fine with that?
I wrote a whole column condemning it. What are you talking about?
Good. But you're not going to deport them, right? Are you going to deport them? Are you going to call them out for literally being linked to a terrorist conspiracy?
People who are citizens who are not citizens of the country should be deported if they're members of a terrorist group. Why don't you understand the distinction between being a member of a terrorist group and saying something wrong?
Should U.S. and UK government and national security go after these groups and these elected officials and these organizations that have literally repeated and mainstreamed a conspiracy that has motivated terrorists to commit terrorism?
Anyone who's a member of a terrorist group should be prosecuted under the law of the country in which they are a terrorist group.
That's not what I asked. That's not what I asked.
Well, but that's what I said. So you were challenging me about something I didn't say.
And I'm very curious.
People are allowed to have
why you are not
opinions,
concerned about this.
But in this instance, I didn't say I wasn't concerned about it. I said you can't deport citizens of the country in which they live, A. And B, I keep pointing out to you that the person we're talking about in this case, this NHS GP, he is a member of a terrorist group. We're not talking about him having the wrong opinions. People are allowed to have the wrong opinions, both in this country and in your country is something that we all celebrate as part of the heritage of Western civilization, and we would all, I hope, defend. The issue here is we have laws in this country about being a member of a terrorist group, and people who are members of a terrorist group, I hope you would agree with me, should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, and if they are prosecuted to the extent of the law and they are foreign citizens, should be deported. Will we agree on that?
We will agree on that, and I'll also say this, for those who are watching, especially the youth, there's a great meme, a Family Guy meme, where there's a chart of who gets to be labeled a terrorist and who doesn't. The front part of the chart is when you have light skin, you're not a terrorist. When it gets darker and darker,
people
you're
like
a
you
terrorist.
always bring race into it. It's got nothing to do with race and everything to do with people who kill people. Yes, people like you, race baiters like you.
I have not heard you.
Yes.
And I've not heard you really express this much outrage against the #1 domestic terror threat against all our communities in America and the UK, which is rising white nationalism.
I am a
dark-skinned,
first-generation immigrant to the UK. I don't play your racial games. Stop using your skin color as a way to shut other people up, and let's talk about the issue. The issue here is, should we tolerate foreign terrorists in our country, or should we remove them? And my opinion is we should remove people who are not conducive to this country. And if someone like me, first-generation immigrant, comes here and wants to be a terrorist, it is first-generation immigrants like me that are at the front of the queue to get them out.
Okay. It's been a fascinating debate.
Remove people who are not conducive to the society.
It's been a fascinating debate. I actually think
who are terrorists, yes.
I actually think, Vajad, to be fair to you, I do think that the white nationalism related terrorist acts that we see increasingly is never played up as much, actually, as Islamist terror was, particularly in the heyday of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. I think it's a perfectly valid point to make, for what it's worth. I think I've made that point, actually, before. Before I let you go, Constantine, you've done a lot of filming with the pro-Palestinian marches in London. What did you find?
Well, I actually went over the last few months, Piers. We went to the protest against anti-Semitism. We went to 2 pro-Palestine protests. We went to an Extinction Rebellion protest, which was very, very funny. I encourage people to go and watch that. But at the latest pro-Palestine protest in particular, there were some fascinating scenes. And, you know, we really tried to talk to people with an open mind. I don't have, actually, contrary to the discussion we've just had, a particularly strong position on it. I'm interested really in getting people's views. And one of the things that came through very strongly is young people in particular, of whom there are many. The way I would kind of describe the demographics are, it's a mixture of sort of beards and headscarves on the one hand and septum piercings and colored hair on the other. The young people who are there in particular, when you ask them very, very basic questions, you know, from which river to
well,
which
let's take a look at a clip, actually. We've got a clip with some of this. Let's watch it here.
So I just noticed the signs that you got from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What does that mean?
Well, it's quite self-explanatory.
How would that come about? What would happen to the Israelis, etc.?
I don't.
I'm trying to think of how to word it. Isn't it just as self-explanatory as the area of land? It's Palestine's land.
What's a socialist intifada?
If I'm being honest with you, I just got this at the stand over there.
Okay.
I don't actually know the definition of the word intifada.
I mean, it's kind of laughable. I don't think for a moment that a lot of people on that march are that ignorant about it. A lot of them clearly are well informed and are absolutely marching because they want peace and they want to cease fire in Gaza. I completely understand that. But Vajat, when you hear that, there are a lot of young people joining up in these marches who are completely clueless. And I actually blame TikTok more than anything, which is the #1 news source now for kids under 25, and spews just relentless nonsense into their heads. And that's where they get their news.
This is where I'm going to stand up for the youth. If you look at the youth, it's been a stunning change where most youth here and abroad are actually, if you will, pro-Palestinian and want the occupation to end. And the flip side to that, Piers, I would say is the following. For those who are watching, we're the same when it comes to Facebook, we're the same when it comes to X, and we're the same when it comes to mainstream media. You are a breath of fresh air because you allow multiple opinions to come on, talk about Palestinian side and Israeli side. In America, you know that this wasn't the case. And so for those people who are terrified by the TikTok, just think about what limited viewpoints that you got for 30, 40 years. And now, for better and for worse, this young generation is exposed to multiple narratives and they see for themselves what's happening, which is why you see the shift in which a lot of people, especially in Israel and here, are horrified by the Netanyahu government, want an end to the occupation, want a ceasefire, hate Hamas, hate extremists in the Netanyahu government, and believe that Palestinians have a right to freedom.
Yeah, well, they certainly do, in my estimation. But there is one clip, Constantine, which really got to me. It was about me. Let's take a look.
So I see you've got a sign that says journalism that get paid for selling lies, and I'm guessing that's Piers Morgan, right? Why do you say that this is journalism that's selling lies?
It's very obvious what is going on, all the lies about what happened on the October 7th, the justification for the genocide, they're all based on lies.
When you say lies about October 7th, what do you mean?
All those allegations that we never saw any footages of decapitated children that Piers Morgan always asked about, and all those women that got gang raped.
I mean, it was quite extraordinary, Constantine, because one of the problems with platforming everybody actually for the last 3 months is that you end up with the extremes on both sides hating you with equal vengeance and often being completely ill-informed actually about what I've actually said. But it was enlightening to see that, because I see that all day long on social media, that kind of view, which is really based on a lack of reality.
Well, there was a lot of that going on in the protest. And interestingly, I mean, you say most people there are well informed. We released in that half-an-hour documentary that people can go to Trigonometry, our YouTube channel, and watch. We released every single interview that we did. So we haven't cherry-picked these moments to make people look bad or anything like that. It contains, they're shortened down, but they are basically the content of what people said to us.
Okay.
And I have to say, most of the people we spoke to, didn't really seem that well informed, most of them. And secondly, I would say there was an awful lot of the sort of thing you just heard, where people have some kind of way of pretending October 7th didn't happen. In fact, the first person you see in the video talks about how it's a false flag operation. There seems to be a lot of that going on too, where people are sort of, they sort of wish away the terrorist attack on October 7th. And it makes sense, because if you're calling for a ceasefire, and you're calling on Israel to unilaterally, essentially, engage in the ceasefire, you have to pretend October 7th didn't happen, because otherwise you'd be calling on Hamas to hand over the hostages and the terrorists who took them, because that's how you get a ceasefire.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest blow-ups I had, Vajat, was after that interview with that doctor, actually, in which I'd already read out some quotes from another member of his group, talking about LGBT filth, feminist filth, really horrible, homophobic, misogynist stuff, which this guy had been caught saying. And the doctor is the leader of the UK Arms, as one of his people. And then he talked about people who want now to, women in particular, who want now to become Muslim. And I said, what, to live under oppression? And what I meant was the oppression that had been spouted by this guy. You know, I'm not remotely anti-Muslim. I'm not remotely anti-Islam. I led the media campaign in this country against the Iraq War, for example. I led the defense of Qatar for its right to have the World Cup and exposed a lot of Western hypocrisy about the Christians there and so on. So I really am not remotely anti-Muslim. I was talking about the kind of interpretation of Islam and Muslim world that members of that group espouse, which is vile against women. So if you want them to come into that world, it is oppressive. But it was interesting to me to watch the ferocious explosion on social media, which bore no relation to the context of why I said what I said.
If I may, I've been in this for a long time. I was 21 years old when 9/11 happened. I'm a Muslim-American college student. And let me just, if I may, explain to your viewers the double standard that the rest of us feel. Just very quickly. Muslims are asked for the past 20 years to condemn violent acts done by violent people we've never met. When I came on your show last time, you remember that. It was a nutty guest who accused me of being Hamas simply because I'm Muslim.
Right.
And I had to condemn every single violent extremist organization. That's a double standard that never happens to any other group, and I hope it doesn't happen to any other group. The second thing is, the most extreme violent members of our quote-unquote community are used to define us. The most extreme, violent, reprehensible people are used to define the religion of 1.8 billion people. That does not happen to other groups, right? Imagine if I said all white people are defined by the KKK or Donald Trump, and each and every single time you're on TV, I'm asking you, what do you say about these white nationalist groups? What do you say about Donald Trump? Aren't you ashamed? Have you condemned them? You're like, why are you asking me? And most of my friends aren't like this.
You did that earlier
and then
in this
finally,
conversation.
the warning I want to give here is you and I, Piers, had the foresight to see the devastation of the war on terror. You and I were the ones 20 years ago who were against it. For those who are watching, especially in the UK, learn from America's mistakes. When you use fear and anger and rage to create domestic and foreign policies, it leads to extremism, it leads to divisions. We had a war against Iraq and Afghanistan. We had a quagmire. We had people being deported. We had a chilling effect. We had a trust deficit between law enforcement and American Muslim communities. We had a rise in hate crimes. Learn from our mistakes and don't let the worst of you and your worst fears contaminate what you have in the UK, which is a multiracial society. You still have hope.
Vajak, thank you very much indeed for joining me, especially at late notice as it was today. We appreciate it. Konstantin, always great to have you on. I commend that film you've made. It's very enlightening. People can go see it on the Trigonometry website, which is well worth half an hour of your time. Thank you.